Dear learners, today I am going to start the next units, that is significance of a structural functional approach. And this is also very important units of the comparative government and politics. And this is a structural functional approach is also known as functionalisms. It's a sociological perspective that sees a society as a complex system whose parts work together to promote stability, social orders. This approach is rooted in the works of sociologists like the Emile Durkheim's, Tolkien Parsons, and Robert Martins. Here are some key details and significance of this approach. That is, we have the different kind of the approaches. First important approach, that is society as a systems and structures. These are relatively stable patterns of social behaviors like the institutions like family, educations and politics. Second part of social system, that is functions. These refer to the consequences of social structures for the operations of society as a whole and manifest and latent functions. This is very important parts of the structural functions approach. Next, that is the key concept of the structural functional approach, that is the social structures. The organized patterns of social relationships and social institutions that together constitute society. Social functions, that means the contributions made by social activity to the continuations of social systems. Manifest functions intend and recognize consequences of social structures. Latent functions, that means the untamed and unrecognized consequences of social structures. Direct functions harmful consequences of people's actions that undermines the stability of social systems. Next, that is interdependence. Each part of society is seen as dependent on the others, contributing to the functionings and stability of the society. Equilibriums, society tends to the returns to a state of stability after distributions and integrations, that is social institutions and process must work together to maintain the cohesive society. Next is significance. And we're talking about the significance of a structural function approach, that is understanding of social stability. And for the social stability, functionalism helps explain how society maintains orders and stability through shared norms and value. Role of social institutions highlight the importance of institutions, family, educations, religions, and in maintaining social cohesions and ensuring the survival of the society. That means here is no any kind of the institutions. Social change explain how social change is also an adaptive process rather than a sudden or revolutionary one. Social change occurs when parts of the systems are not functioning correctly and need to be adjusted. Guiding policy, this perspective can guide social policy by emphasizing the importance of stable institutions and practice that contribute to the overall functionings of the society. Analyzing the social phenomena, that means providing a framework for analyzing social phenomena, understanding how various parts of the society are interrelated, and identifying the functions of different social practice and the institutions. The significance of a structural functional approach. The structural functional approach has been object to several criticism, primarily due to its perceived limitations and basis. Here are some key criticisms are conservatisms and justifications of the status quo. Conservatisms, that means functionalisms, tends to emphasize the stability and orders of society, often justifying existing social structures and inequality. It is seen as inherently conservative, resisting change and reforms. That means this is very important parts or criticism, that is called the conservatism. Functionalism tend to analyzing the stability and orders of society, often justifying existing social structural inequality. It is seen as inherently conservative, resisting change and reforms. A status quo, critics argue that this approach overlooks the way in which social structures can be oppressive or unjust, failing to address power imbalance and the interest of the dominant groups. Overemphasis on stability and orders. Neglect of conflicts. That means कि these are the very important criticisms. Neglect of conflicts. Functionalism is criticized for its focus on harmony and consensus, often ignoring social conflicts, power struggles, and the potential for the societal disturbances. This is very important parts of the neglect of conflicts. Aesthetics view by concentrating on the stability and equilibrium of society. It's tend to present a static view of social life, failing to adequately explain social change and transformations. So this is the second important criticisms of the structural functional approach. That is called the neglect of conflicts. And these neglect of conflicts, functionalism is criticized for its focus on harmony and consensus, often ignoring social conflicts, power struggles, and the potential for social distortion. Aesthetics view by concentrating on the stability and equilibrium of society is tend to present a static view of social life, failing to adequately explain social change and transformations. So this is also one of the important criticisms. Next to that is the neglect of individual agency. That means कि when we talking about this criticism, structural determinations, yeah, determinisms, the approach emphasizes the role of social structures over individual actions, often neglecting the agency of individuals and impact of human behavior on social structures. This is very important parts of the things. This approach emphasizes the role of society, structural individuals' actions, often neglecting agency of individuals and impact of human behavior on social structures. Homogeneity of assumptions. Functionalisms assume that all the members of the society share the same value and norms, overlooking the diversity of experience and perspective. Homogeneity has a kind of the functionalism assumptions that all members of society share the same value and norms, overlooking the diversity of experience and perspectives. Next, that is called the circular reasonings. That means कि when we talking about the significance of a structural functional approach, uh, typology, functionalist explanations can be circular where the existence of a social institute is justify its functions without independent evidence. For example, saying that each practice exists because it is functional and it is functional because it exists. Next is a historical analysis. This approach often fails to consider the historical context of social institutions, presenting them as naturals and inevitables rather than products of a specific historical conditions. Limited explanations of social change. Gradual changes. Functionalism typically explains social change as how as a slow and adaptive process are struggling to account for a rapid or revolutionary changes. Resistance to change. The emphasis on stability and equilibrium imply resistance to change, making it difficult to explain period of a significant social upheavals. This is very important things of the significance of a structural changes. Failure to address the social inequality and powers. Functionalisms tend to overlook or justify social inequality, view them as necessary for the functionings of the society. This perspective can be perpetuate systems of inequality by framing them as a functionals. Marginal groups. This approach often fails to consider the perspectives and experience of marginals or disadvantaged groups, focusing on instead on the dominant social norms and the value. These are the very important parts of the structural functional approach. Ideological basis, that means when we're talking about the criticisms of the structural functional approach, that means on the basis of normative bias. Critics argue that functionalism is biased towards a normative view of society, promoting certain value and norms as universals and beneficials while marginalizing alternative viewpoints. This is very important ideological criticisms that is called the normative bias. Critics argue that functionalism is basis towards the normative view of society, promoting certain value and norms as universals and beneficial while marginalizing the alternative viewpoints. Western centrics, this approach has been criticized for being Eurocentric, often reflecting the social structures and value of Western society and ignoring the diversity of social arrangements globally. This is very important parts of the things. This is called the finally the in the conclusion way. A structural functionals approach has provided valuable insight into the functionals and stability of social system. This criticism highlights the limitations in addressing conflicts, changes individuals' agency, social inequality, and ideological basis. These criticisms have led to the development of alternative sociological theory that aim to address these shortcomings such as conflict theory and symbolic interactionalisms. This is very important parts. Now come to the gist of this units that is called the uh, structural functionals approach. That means the structural functional approach is also a kind of the sociological perspective that sees society as a complex systems. And we have a different kind of the system like the structural and functions. Then there is also some important concept like the social structural, social functions, manifestation functions, latent functions, and diet functionals. And there is some kind of the interdependence, equilibriums, and integrations. Significance like the understanding of social stability, role of the social institutions, family, educations, religions, and social changes explain how social changes is a slow and adaptive process rather than a sudden or revolutionary one. Social changes occurs when parts of the system are not functioning correctly and need to be adjusted. Guiding policy, this perspective can guide social policy by emphasizing the importance of stable institutions and practice that contribute to the social overall functioning of the society. Analyzing the social phenomena, then come to the important criticisms. Some of the important criticism is like the conservative and justifications of the status quo. Conservatisms, that is functionalisms, tend to the emphasis the stability and order of society, often justifying existing social structures and inequality. It is seen as inherently conservative, resisting social change and reforms. A status quo criticisms argue that this approach overlooks the way in which social structure can be oppressive or unjust, failing to address power imbalance and the interest of dominant groups. Overemphasis on stability and the orders, neglect of conflicts, a static view, neglect of individual agency, that is a structural determinations and homogeneity assumptions. Next is circulating reasonings, etiology, functionalist explanations can be circular, where the existence of a social institutions is justified by its functions without independent evidence. For example, saying that a practice exists because it is functional and is functional because of it exists. A historical analysis, this approach often fails to consider the historical context of social institutions, presenting them as a natural and inevitable rather than product of a specific historical conditions. Limited explanations of social change. Gradual changes functionally typically explain social changes as slow and adaptive process struggle to account for a rapid overwhelming changes. Resistance to the change, that is emphasis on the stability and equilibrium, imply resistance to change, making it difficult to explain period of significant social and failure to address the social inequality and powers, that is functioning claim to overlook the justified social inequality, view them as necessary for functioning of society. This perspective can be perpetuate systems of inequality by framing them as a functional marginal groups. The approach often fails to consider the perspectives and experience of marginalized or disadvantaged groups, focusing instead on the dominant social norms and value. Ideological basis, that is normative basis. Critics argue that functionalism is biased towards a normative view of society, promoting certain value and norms as universals and beneficial, while marginal alternative viewpoints. Western centrics, the approach has been criticizing for being Eurocentric, often reflecting in social structures and value of Western society and in ignoring the diversity of social arrangements globally. This is the final conclusions of the structural functional approach. Each provided valuable insight into the functionings and stability of social systems. This criticism highlighted its limitations in addressing conflicts, change individual agency, social inequality, and ideological basis. These criticisms have led to the developments of alternative sociological theory that aim to address these shortcomings, such as conflict theory and symbolic interactionalisms. Thank you. This is the end of the units.